What I've most treasured about NDI, what brought me back after 20 years, is the honor to support and work with women and men of courage from all over the world. Heroes who, often at enormous personal sacrifice, choose to dedicate their lives to protect freedom and promote democracy. These three, whom we celebrate and will hear from tonight, represent a new generation of political activism. They are an antidote to the cynicism and harsh edges of our time. They represent in practice what we know in principle, that the desire for democracy and dignity is not merely a Western idea, but a universal aspiration. Samson Itodo is a dynamic lawyer turned activist who has galvanized Nigeria's youth to get more involved in his nation's politics. He worked successfully to lower the age for elected office in Nigeria and is preparing to spread his reform message to youth across Africa with the potential to transform the continent. Masih Alinejad has used social media to promote women's empowerment and free expression in her home country of Iran. You will hear about her My Stealthy Freedom movement, which has inspired thousands of Iranian women, as well as inducing a plethora of copycat social media initiatives by others around the world promoting free choice. And Vladimir Kara-Murza is a Russian political leader and activist who, at the age of 37, has helped lead an opposition political party, run for parliament, and for his efforts suffered 2 almost fatal poisoning attempts by the Russian government. Despite what he has endured, Vladimir continues to work in Russia and speak truth to power. We wanted to have all three of these remarkable people share their stories with you this evening. So enough from me. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Samson, Masih, and Vladimir.
I never thought in my lifetime that a young person who's 25 years can run for office in Nigeria. I never thought that in my lifetime it was going to happen that I would see that our Constitution is amended to reduce the age for running for office. And I'll tell you why. Because I come from a country that does not consider its youth population as an asset, but rather expends young people and instrumentalize them for violence. I come from a country that does not care about the future and cares about investing in the future, but more about exploiting the youth population. But young Nigerians got angry that democracy was not delivering development to the people, and angry that we've got a culture of recycling leaders. And as we speak today, we still have people who were ruling us in the 70s and in the 80s still in the realms of power. But how can a country and a continent that boasts to be the youngest continent or the youngest country in Africa be led by a minority? Because politically or demographically, young people are a majority, but politically they are a minority. And that is why Boko Haram would always have a recruiting ground, because our ruling political elite have not appreciated the cost of exclusion. And what young people did was to look in the face of anger, disenchantment, and loss and faith in political institutions. We raise up to say it is enough. Because we got a constitution that says on one hand you are eligible to vote when you're 18, but you have to wait for 22 years before you can run for president. Or you have to wait for 17 years before you can run for the upper legislative chamber, because before the not too young to run, you have to be 40 to be president of Nigeria. You have to be 35 to be a member of the upper legislative chamber. And you have to be 30 to be a member of the lower house. And we felt it was actually injustice. And young people decided to change their constitution from the streets, using their phones and by building a strong alliance with an older generation that cared about inclusive politics. Today in Nigeria, with the Not Too Young to Run movement, we've been able to amend our constitution. Nigeria operates a very rigid constitution. It is difficult to amend our constitution. You need two-thirds majority of both chambers in the National Assembly. You need 24 states out of 36 states of the Federation. And you know, as a pluralistic society, it is very, very difficult to generate consensus. But young people made that happen. And for the first time in 10 years since we started struggling to amend our constitution, we attained victory. And what young people did was to renew their faith in democracy. And what really stands out was the fact that my parents are not politicians. My parents are not highly placed. But I come from a country where you need to be highly placed and be connected to actually drive change. But what we did with Not Too Young to Run was to say, it doesn't matter your family background or your geographical extraction, that democracy is about inclusion. And we built a strong narrative about the power of inclusion. And we galvanized young people, and they changed their constitution. And today we are celebrated across the world. The United Nations adopted the Not Too Young to Run, ECOWAS did, as well as the Africa Union has adopted the Not Too Young to Run as a global campaign. And today, thank you. As we speak, we're going into an election. For the first time since return to democracy, we've got younger people getting interested to run for the office of the president. For the first time, the percentage of young people who are indicating interest to run for office is increasing. But we didn't just ask that young people should run for office. But again, it boils down to the question, and Madeleine makes a very vital point about the concept of democracy. We can't continue with this kind and this caliber of leadership if we care about the future. We can't talk about development if young people are not in the room. And that is what Not Too Young to Run seeks to do. And I'd like to pay a personal tribute to NDI for the support provided to Yaga Africa and the Not Too Young to Run movement in ensuring that our constitution was amended. NDI was with us all the way on the streets when we stood for hours to get our constitution amended, down to the villages. NDI was there with all the support. And I stand here humbled and really privileged and to say thank you very, very much for the support. And I want to assure you that that revolution that we aspire and we desire so much, the foundation has been laid. And in 2023, we will have a new cadre of leadership that would not just rule Nigeria, but will rule Africa. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm coming from Iran, and to be honest, when I see a huge crowd of Americans, I get nervous. Because from the age of 7, when we start school, we are told that we have to say death to America, death to Israel. But I'm here today to say that the Islamic Republic brought my family on a state television to disown me publicly just because of fighting for democracy. And here in America, I found a big family. And thank you so much. But my problem is totally different, brother. When I want to talk about democracy in Iran, people do not believe me because we have election. People vote. But I'm here to say that democracy is not just voting, because we, the people inside Iran, we have to choose between those candidates who first being chosen by the supreme leader of Iran. So we have to choose between bad and worse. And at the end, we have to choose between the worst and the disaster. And when we talk about democracy and we cry for democracy, people in the West, especially Americans, they don't believe us. So that is why I want to mention that it is a great honor being here with Secretary Albright. When you met with the President of Iran, President Khatami, you touched our heart because we thought this is going to be the first time that finally the ice is going to be broken and we are going to be friends again. But the problem in Iran is this. We don't have freedom of expression. We don't have freedom for media, a free press. And that is why the government of Iran know that our weapon is this, social media. So they filtered Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and instead you can see their presence on Facebook as well. Our supreme leader has Twitter account. Our president has Twitter account. Our foreign minister has Twitter account. But Twitter is filtered in Iran. So that is why you couldn't hear the voice of Iranian people, the true voice of Iranian people who has been censored for years and years. When I left Iran, it was 2009. We had election. Millions of Iranians, like me, had hope that we're going to reform. We're going to get rid of Ahmadinejad. You know him, for sure. And people had hope. But what happened? They stole the election. And people took to the street. More than 100 people got killed, got tortured to death in prison. And after that, not only me, many journalists was forced to flee the country. So when I came here, I found NDI. They just came to me and they said, we want to publish some of your articles. Why? Because I was here without any media, and Facebook became my media. So I was the one exposing the news of 57 people who got killed. I myself interviewed the family of those mothers who giving me the details of how their children got shot in the head, got tortured to death in prison. And NDI helped me. And in that time, I remember NDI became a great deal of hope for me. And thank you so much for that. After that, I found global audiences. And I told myself that as a woman, your presence, your existence means you are a true fighter for democracy in Iran. So we have to do something. So I launched my campaign called My Stealthy Freedom, which is a platform on Facebook with 1 million followers and on Instagram with 2 million followers, allows Iranian women to take off their headscarf and protest against compulsory hijab. Why? Because I strongly believe that this is the first and the most visible symbol of oppression. I have beautiful people inside Iran, but the only thing that you can understand when you enter my beautiful country that this is the Islamic Republic is through women. We are the one that we have to carry the most visible of, the oppressor regime with us. We have to carry their ideology with us every day. And as Reagan said, we try to bring this wall down. Then every individual woman can be their own leader. This is the way that we can bring democracy. We don't like war. We don't want to be isolated. But all we want is this. When you're hearing that Iran has democracy, Iran has election, just think about those people who never have a chance to have a say, not in their own media, not in their own television, not on social media freely. I'm talking here with you right now. They arrested 29 people who protested against compulsory hijab. They joined my campaign, and their crime was what? Waving a headscarf in public. So what I want is this. Now, Islamic Republic is in a serious crisis, but not because of America, because of its own women. And I'm going to give you, I know I'm going to give you one example. As I said, there are 3 pillars for the Islamic Republic: death to America, death to Israel, and compulsory hijab. They spend millions and millions to keep this wall. I received a death threat, and I went to the Iran's interest section in DC to make an official complaint. Guess what happened? They told me, you have to cover yourself first. So you see, for the Islamic Republic of Iran, a woman's life is not as important as a woman's hair. So what they did, I practiced my civil disobedience. I ran to the upstairs and wailed. They called the great Satans, as they called America great Satans. They called the secret service of their biggest enemy to save themselves from an Iranian unveiled woman. That shows the power of ordinary women and will bring democracy. If you recognize this voice, thank you so much.
Secretary Albright, Ambassador Mitchell, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is an honor to join you this evening to celebrate an organization whose mission sounds so unusual and so hopeful in our era of realpolitik, to support and strengthen democratic institutions through citizen participation, openness, and accountability in government. Words we don't hear too often these days. In these last 3.5 decades, the National Democratic Institute has been recognized by more governments than I have time to mention tonight. But I think one of the most meaningful recognitions came in March of 2016, when by Justice Ministry Ordinance number 393-R, the government of Vladimir Putin officially designated NDI as an undesirable organization. Coming from a regime that exemplifies kleptocracy and authoritarianism, that is a badge of honor. And it is without any irony whatsoever that I want to congratulate you on this designation. It is a designation that my organization, Open Russia, shares with NDI, as well as with the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and a few other members of this select club. Andrei Sakharov once referred to the internal exile in Gorky, where he was sent by the Politburo, as an award. When President Yeltsin's government asked the Russian Supreme Court to annul the Soviet-era convictions for the dissident Vladimir Bukovsky, he protested. I wear them as medals, he said. This week actually marks an important anniversary for the Russian dissident movement. December 5th, 1965, Moscow witnessed something it hadn't seen for decades, an opposition rally, when hundreds of people gathered on Pushkin Square to demand an end to political trials. That day is usually considered to be the birthday of the dissident movement in the Soviet Union, a unique phenomenon, a handful of people whose only weapon was their word, who in the end proved stronger than a mighty totalitarian system with the world's most developed machine of repression. As Sakharov once said, this was never about numbers, but about breaching a psychological barrier of silence. Today we often hear that Vladimir Putin's regime is invincible, that he's very popular among Russian citizens. The proof comes in the impressive election returns and the sky-high opinion poll figures. As if an election victory means something when real opponents are prevented from running. Some by a politically motivated court order, others by a bullet in the back. As if opinion polls matter when so many people, for evident reasons, are unwilling and afraid to honestly state their opinion. As my good friend Boris Vishnevsky, an opposition lawmaker in St. Petersburg, likes to remind, Ceausescu had 99% in the polls 2 weeks before his overthrow. I went and fact-checked that this is actually true, but it didn't help him much. Beyond the pretend reality of the Kremlin propaganda, there are many people in Russia who reject the corruption, authoritarianism, and belligerence that have become the hallmarks of the present regime. So many of them are young people, university and high school students who have spent their whole lives under Putin, but who are increasingly saying enough. It was they who dominated the protests that swept across Russia in these past 18 months, when tens of thousands of people went to the streets everywhere from Kaliningrad to Khabarovsk. They are literally the future of Russia. And in the end, there's not much Mr. Putin will be able to do about them. Our work is with this generation. Our mission is to help them become active and informed citizens, to prepare them for the task of building a new and better Russia of tomorrow. As part of this work, as part of this experience building, we run training projects and programs of political and civic education. We run candidates in elections all over the country, because even if they aren't allowed to win, they're able to learn how to campaign, how to walk door to door, how to communicate with people. We're using the instruments we have to prepare them for the time when they will be able to do the real thing. Like the famed Soviet pianist Rudolf Kara, who spent 13 years in internal exile, practicing on a pretend keyboard he had carved out of a plank of wood, just so his fingers wouldn't forget, and went on to become one of the most accomplished musicians of his era. The Russia that we work with is so much bigger and so much better than Vladimir Putin. One day it will have a government it deserves, a government that respects and represents its own people. And we will continue to do everything we can to try to bring that day a little bit closer.